Right after the funeral, my sons cornered me and said, "Dad, sign the papers. The insurance money is ours now." $50,000 meant more to them than their mother's life. I couldn't breathe. Later, I found her diary tucked inside an old jewelry box. In her handwriting, she revealed names, dates, and lies they never wanted me to see. That diary is fire. It will burn their entire world down. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and tell us where you're listening from in the comments. I sit in the old recliner in my living room, the one that still carries the faint smell of leather mixed with my wife Margaret's perfume. And I cannot help but remember everything I gave up for my sons. I worked 2 jobs for decades. I fixed cars during the day and stocked shelves at night. Every paycheck, every bonus, every tax refund went to them. I paid almost $60,000 in tuition for David's business degree. I remember writing those checks one after another while eating peanut butter sandwiches for dinner so he could have a meal plan at college. I bought Brian a $25,000 pickup truck when he turned 20, even though my own car rattled like an old tin can. When David married, Margaret and I spent another $30,000 on the wedding, renting the country club and covering the bar tab because he said his friends would expect it. We did it gladly, or so I thought. I also remember the vacations we never took. Margaret once dreamed of going to Italy to walk the streets of Florence, but we canceled that trip to cover a down payment on David's first condo. I told myself love was sacrifice, and I wore it like a badge of honor. Now, as I look back, that badge feels like a chain around my neck. Every dollar, every canceled dream, every silent dinner was supposed to buy their future, and instead it seems to have bought their contempt. I gave and gave, but they took, and now they circle like vultures around what little I have left. The house I am sitting in has been mine for 40 years. $600,000 is what the realtor said it would fetch today. But to me, it is priceless. Margaret and I bought it in 1982 for $95,000. We painted the walls ourselves, raised the boys in these rooms, and buried our dog Max under the oak tree out back. The dining table still has knife marks from birthday cakes we sliced, and the hallway is lined with photographs of Christmas mornings. Yet last week, my sons spoke about it like it was nothing more than a stack of dollar bills rotting under the sun. David dared to bring a stranger, a realtor, into my living room without asking. He looked around, scribbled notes, and whispered about quick cash potential. My hands shook as I watched. This was not just wood and brick. This was Margaret's garden. This was the smell of Sunday roasts. This was the echo of laughter that once made the walls sing. Now the rooms are quiet, and the laughter has been replaced with arguments about market value. I see the photo of Margaret on our wedding day, smiling in her veil, and it pierces me. That picture once brought me joy. Now it feels like a cruel reminder that the family we built with love is collapsing under greed. What was once a legacy is now a battleground. It was during one of those painful evenings of sorting through Margaret's belongings that I stumbled upon the secret she left behind. In the back of her closet, hidden under quilts she had sewn, I found a small wooden box. My hands trembled as I lifted it, recognizing the careful way she had wrapped it. Inside was her diary, bound in worn leather, and an envelope sealed with her handwriting. I opened it slowly, and what I found nearly knocked the breath out of me. She had documented conversations she overheard, notes she copied from bank statements, and even a duplicate of the life insurance policy showing the forged signature she was forced to make. She wrote plainly that David had pressured her to increase the payout from $5,000 to $50,000, insisting it was for Dad's protection. But she knew he was lying. In her diary, she wrote dates, amounts, and even the name of the broker. She had carried this knowledge in silence, protecting me from the truth while she was alive. The weight of that discovery crushed me. I wasn't just betrayed by my sons. Margaret had known the danger, and she carried it alone until the end. My grief doubled, mixed with rage and sorrow. That box was not just a keepsake. It was dynamite, and I knew one day it would explode in their faces. For hours after finding that diary, I sat in the dark, staring at the pages. My emotions swung wildly: grief, fury, disbelief, then resolve. The shock was overwhelming, but as I turned each page, I realized what Margaret had done. She hadn't only left memories, she had left me a weapon. The diary was evidence, the kind no lawyer could ignore, the kind that could expose every lie they told. I whispered to the empty room, "Margaret, you knew, and you trusted me to find this. I won't let you down." The sorrow began to shift into something else: determination. They thought they could corner me, that my age made me weak. But they underestimated me. Margaret's last act was to hand me the truth, and I would use it. It wasn't just about saving the house anymore. It was about honoring her, protecting her name, and making sure the truth burned away their greed. The fog of grief began to lift, and in its place grew a fire I had not felt in years. Later that night, my phone buzzed with a message from David. "Dad, I'm sorry if we came off harshly earlier. We're just trying to help. Call me." I looked at the words on the screen, the fake apology dripping from every letter. Once I would have responded immediately, tried to smooth things over, and convinced myself he still loved me. But not anymore. I deleted the message without replying. The silence was my answer. It was a small act, but it was powerful. For the first time in years, I chose myself. I chose peace over their manipulation. I set the phone down, turned it off, and listened to the quiet hum of the refrigerator. It felt like breathing fresh air after being underwater. That one simple act was the first step in reclaiming control, and it marked the moment I stopped being their victim. The house felt different after that. The same recliner that once gave me comfort now felt too big, like it swallowed me whole. The grandfather clock in the corner ticked with a sharpness that reminded me of a countdown, each strike of the pendulum echoing like a warning. The walls, lined with family photos, no longer gave me warmth. They stared back like ghosts of a life that was slipping away. I sat in the dim light of the living room and whispered to the photo of Margaret on the mantel, "I'll protect what we built. I'll protect your memory." The promise settled deep in my bones. The betrayal of my sons had cut me open, but Margaret's secret stitched me back together in a different way. The rooms were quiet, the air heavy, but in that silence I heard something new, a call to action. I was no longer the grieving old man they thought they could manipulate. I was the keeper of her truth, and I knew the day was coming when that truth would be unleashed. If you're still watching and find this story interesting, please comment 1 below to let me know you're here with me. The morning after I found Margaret's wooden box, I woke with a heaviness in my chest, but also a strange kind of clarity. For the first time in months, maybe years, my head wasn't spinning with confusion. I knew what I had to do. The betrayal was real. The evidence was in my hands. The sons I had once trusted with my life were circling like sharks, waiting to tear apart the house, the savings, the legacy their mother and I built brick by brick. But now I wasn't just grieving, I was planning. My first call was to Richard Coleman, my attorney for over 30 years. Richard was more than a lawyer. He had been at Margaret's funeral, standing quietly near the back, his hand over his heart. I dialed his number with fingers that no longer trembled. "Richard," I said, my voice firm, "we need to meet today. It's urgent." He heard the edge in my tone. Within an hour, I was in his office, sitting across from his oak desk with Margaret's diary and the envelope laid out like weapons on the table. He flipped through the pages slowly, his brow furrowed deeper with each line. "Harold," he said finally, "this is serious. Your sons pressured Margaret to alter a life insurance policy, and that's fraud. We can use this, but more importantly, we can move quickly to protect what you still control." My heart pounded, but not from fear. It was the rush of taking back power. Richard picked up the phone, called the bank, and together we arranged to freeze my accounts, nearly $400,000 in savings. As I signed the order, my hand no longer shook. The pen scratched across the paper with a steady rhythm, like a drumbeat announcing the beginning of a new war. When I walked into the bank later that afternoon, the young teller looked up at me with a kind smile. "Good morning, sir. How are you doing today?" she asked. Simple words, but they nearly undid me. My own sons hadn't asked about my well-being in years, not since Margaret's diagnosis. Yet here was a stranger showing me more care in a single sentence than my flesh and blood had in a decade. "I'm holding up," I replied softly. She glanced at the paperwork, recognized the legal freeze, and whispered, "You're doing the right thing, sir." That moment pierced me. The contrast was unbearable. My sons were tearing at my life, while a stranger encouraged me to protect it. It was like the universe itself reminding me I was not powerless. That evening, David and Brian arrived at the house without warning. They walked in as though they owned the place, carrying folders and spreadsheets. David spread the papers across my dining table like a general laying out a battle plan. "Dad," he said, "we've run the numbers. If we sell the house now, you'll have enough to move into a good facility, and the rest can be divided fairly. Look at this." He shoved a printout toward me, highlighting figures, projected profits, even a list of recommended retirement homes. I stayed silent, watching, listening. Brian chimed in. "We already spoke to a realtor. He says this place could go for $600,000, maybe more if we stage it. It's a win-win." My jaw clenched, but I forced myself not to speak. Let them reveal themselves. Let them dig deeper into their greed. They mistook my silence for weakness, smirking as they continued. Then came the insult I'll never forget. David leaned back in his chair, crossed his arms, and said, "Dad, you're 70. You can't manage this place anymore. It's too much for you. Let us handle it. You'll be happier once it's done." The way he said happier made my stomach turn. It wasn't a concern. It was dismissed. In that moment, Margaret's diary burned in my mind, her words about how he pressured her, how he lied. I almost stood up and threw the pages in his face, but I held back. Not yet. Timing mattered. This wasn't the moment for revelation. This was the moment for observation, for cataloging every word, every sneer, every slip of arrogance. 2 days later, they returned, but this time they brought a stranger with them, a tall man in a blazer carrying a leather portfolio. "Dad, this is Mr. Parker," Brian announced. "He's a realtor. He's already walked the property. If we move fast, we can close in 30 days. My blood boiled, but I forced myself to stay composed. Imagine bringing a realtor into my home, my sanctuary, without my permission. The man extended his hand politely, but I didn't take it. I stood there staring, my silence louder than any curse. David spoke over me, excited. "We'll take care of everything, Dad. You don't need to stress. Just sign the papers when we're ready." I thought to myself, they truly believe I am nothing but an obstacle now, an old man too tired to fight. They thought wrong. Back in Richard's office, I replayed every detail for him. He nodded, scribbling notes. "Let them think they're in control," he advised. "Meanwhile, we'll build the case. And Harold, there's something else. I did some digging. Your son David has a record of gambling debts. $95,000 owed to a casino in Reno. And Brian, he defaulted on a loan last year. They're not trying to help you, Harold. They're desperate. They need your money to cover their own mess." I felt my chest tighten, not from weakness but from rage. 95,000. All those years of my sacrifices, and this is what they became, men who squandered everything on cards and dice. Yet in that fury, I also saw the opening. Their secrets weren't just shameful, they were ammunition. As I left the office, I whispered under my breath, "They think I'm finished, but the game is just beginning." My voice was steady, my spine straight. For the first time since Margaret passed, I felt alive. I felt like a man with purpose, with a mission. The betrayal had cut me deep, but it had also awakened me. I wasn't just fighting for myself. I was fighting for Margaret's memory, for every penny we saved, for every dream we built together. The following weekend, David and Brian called a family meeting. They sat me down in the living room, surrounded me with charts and numbers again. "Dad, this is the smart move," Brian said. "Sign the papers. We'll make sure everything is handled." They even produced an old letter Margaret once wrote me about considering downsizing someday. "See, even Mom thought this was the right path," David argued. I looked at the letter, recognizing her handwriting, but also recognizing the desperation in their eyes. They had to dig into the past, twisting her words just to justify their greed. I almost laughed. "You're right," I said calmly. "She did write that. But do you know what else she left me?" They leaned forward, eager, thinking I might finally break. I didn't give them the satisfaction. Not yet. I let the silence stretch until it felt heavy, then stood and walked away. Behind me, they grumbled, frustrated. They had no idea that Margaret's diary and Richard's documents were waiting like loaded cannons, ready to fire. That night, I sat at my desk, staring at the documents Richard had given me, the frozen account confirmation, the gambling debt record, the default notice. The stack of papers felt heavier than stone, but stronger than steel. Each page was a shield, each signature a sword. As I placed my pen on the final form, an order securing the deed of the house in my sole control, I felt a surge of strength rush through me. My hand didn't shake. My breathing was calm. The signature came out bold and clear, a declaration that I was no longer the man they thought they could manipulate. I closed my eyes and whispered to Margaret, "We're not done yet. They will regret underestimating us." For those of you watching this, if you've ever seen a parent treated as though they were nothing, if you've ever felt the sting of disrespect from those who should have honored you, I want you to comment one word below. Just type respect. That's it, because respect is what every parent deserves. As I set the pen down, I realized this was only the beginning. They thought the old man was cornered. They thought the house was already theirs. But what they didn't know was that I held a truth powerful enough to shatter their world, a truth waiting in Margaret's diary. Backed by their own sins, their debts, their lies. The storm was coming, and I was no longer afraid. If you're still watching and find this story interesting, please comment 2 below to let me know you're here with me. The afternoon light fell flat across my dining room like a sheet of dull tin, and the house felt smaller than I remembered. I set water glasses in front of every chair and straightened the stack of folders Richard had given me, then pressed my palm flat on the wood. This table had carried birthday cakes and homework and Margaret's Sunday roasts. Today, it would carry evidence. The front door opened without a knock. David came in first, confident stride, eyes already sweeping the room like a man measuring square footage. Brian followed a step behind. Their wives trailed them, whispering and checking their phones. I heard a second door. Richard arrived from the back porch, calm, jacket buttoned, the same quiet look he wore in court. Behind him came 2 people I had invited on purpose. Mrs. Thompson from next door, with her cardigan buttoned wrong, and Mr. Harris from church, walking carefully with his cane. They sat near the window, witnesses, years of life in their faces. I wanted that in the room. David set a thick binder on the table. He did not sit. He took the head of the table like he owned the house. He started talking before anyone could breathe. He talked about market cycles and rates and how my age made maintenance impractical. He used phrases like unlocking equity and rational choice. Brian opened a folder and handed out glossy sheets showing staged rooms that did not belong to me. He pointed to a number at the bottom. $600,000. If we accept an offer this month, he said, we can move Dad into a place with full services. We will manage the excess funds. It is safer that way. I waited. I watched their mouths move and their fingers tap. I remembered the call I had made yesterday morning, the one to the bank manager who had known Margaret by name, the one who froze $400,000 of my savings, the one to flag any attempt to withdraw or transfer without my signature. I could still feel the pen in my hand as I signed. It had not shaken. Not once. I remembered the email Richard sent at dawn to record a protective affidavit on the deed. I remembered the breath I took when he slid the stamped page toward me, the page that made me the sole controlling owner. I kept those memories close like smooth stones in a pocket. I let the noise keep going. Mrs. Thompson lifted her chin. Harold mowed his lawn in 90-degree heat last week, she said. He fixed my fence in April. He is doing just fine in this house. Mr. Harris cleared his throat. He reads the scripture at the 8 o'clock service, he said. Never misses a word. Their voices were plain, not dramatic. True? My boys did not like truth when it walked in on old legs and soft shoes. Richard folded his hands. He waited for David to sit. He did not, so Richard spoke to me, not to them. Harold, he said, gentle but firm, you asked me to prepare certain documents after our meeting on Monday. Do you want me to present them now? I nodded. David laughed under his breath. Brian smirked. Richard opened his briefcase. He placed 3 items on the table in a neat row. A certified letter from the bank, an affidavit from the county recorder, a second envelope sealed with red tape. Brian leaned forward. What is that supposed to be? Richard answered, without looking at him. The bank confirms the freeze on Harold's accounts, approximately $400,000. Any attempt to withdraw without Harold's written consent will be reported to me and to the police. The recorded affidavit confirms Harold's sole control of the deed. No sale can proceed without his notarized approval. He placed his fingertips on the 3rd envelope. And this contains exhibits related to recent financial activity by both of you. David reached across the table. Richard did not pull back. He simply tapped the envelope once and said, my name. Harold. It was enough. I slid the envelope toward me. I broke the seal. I did not rush. I placed 2 pages in front of David and 2 pages in front of Brian. The room went quiet as paper met wood. David read first. His face lost color. It returned in a flush. He shoved his page away. This is an invasion of privacy, he said. His voice broke on the last word. Brian stared at his page longer, lips moving. This is out of context, he said finally. Everyone has debt. Richard's voice stayed even. Gambling debt of $95,000 in Reno is not a car loan. A default on a $50,000 personal note is not a utility bill. The dates line up with the timing of your pressure on your father. That is context. I looked at my sons. This house is not a casino fund, I said. Your mother's garden is not a slot machine. You want me to sell what she loved to pay for what you lost. They did not answer. Their wives looked at the floor. The room breathed like a lung. David tried a new angle. He softened his tone. He reached for an old memory. Dad, do you remember when Mom talked about downsizing? She wanted to clean less. She said a smaller place might be nice. He pulled a folded letter from his binder. Margaret's handwriting. I knew it at once. The slant of the M, the tail on the G, he slid it toward me like a gift. She wrote this to you. She wanted this too. I picked up the letter. I read the first lines. I remembered the day she wrote it. Early spring, the morning sun on the table, the coffee she poured me, the way she laughed when the pen leaked on her sleeve. Someday, she had written, we might think about a smaller house when we are ready, when it feels right. I set the letter down carefully. Someday, I said, not 6 weeks after her funeral. The word funeral knocked the air from my chest. I saw the cheap coffin they chose when they insisted on arranging the service. I remembered watching the pastor hurry through the prayers. I heard the phone buzz in David's pocket. I heard Brian whisper about the death certificate and the insurance forms. I felt the anger rise like heat. It warmed my hands but did not shake them. I reached into my folder and placed a small digital recorder on the table. I clicked play. My voice filled the room first. I could hear my own footsteps on concrete. I had been in the garage that night, tools in hand, the door half closed. Then another voice on the recording. David, clear, young, hard. If Mom dies, Dad will be easier to push. When he is weak, we win. The recorder clicked as the clip ended. I did not speak. The room held its breath. David stared at the recorder like it was a snake. Brian whispered, "You said that? You said that?" David turned on him. "You were there." Brian shook his head. "I never said it out loud." The words were small, like a boy at the principal's desk. Mrs. Thompson put a hand to her mouth. Mr. Harris shook his head slowly. Richard did not move at all. I took Margaret's diary from my folder. The leather was soft from years in her hands. I opened to a page with a date circled in ink. I read aloud. He asked for my signature today to increase Harold's life insurance. He said it was for protection. The agent looked away when I asked why it had to be done now. My hand shook when I signed. I went to the bathroom and cried. I turned a page. He told me not to worry about the funeral. He has a man who can make it simple. He said simple twice. Simple, simple. He was already counting the money. David slammed his hand on the table. "You cannot prove that," he shouted. Richard slid another page in front of him, a photocopy of a policy change with a signature that looked like Margaret's but missed the small flourish she always made. A note from the agent acknowledging a meeting, a date, a time, a phone number. Richard spoke quietly. "We do not have to prove it here, but we can, and we will, if forced." Brian tried to pivot. "None of this explains the gas leak," he said. "That was an accident, a tragedy. We did what we could." He said tragedy like a man trying to audition for grief. I heard the word and saw the cold sandwiches at the reception. I saw the bill with its bottom line in bold. I saw the way the funeral director looked at me with pity when he asked if I wanted to see other options, and David said no. Richard placed a final envelope on the table. "There is more," he said. "Harold did not want to do this part here, but you have left him no choice." He nodded to me. I opened the envelope. I pulled out a thin stack, a lab report on gas line integrity, a note from the inspector with the words, "No structural fault," a statement from a neighbor who smelled something strange the night before the so-called accident and saw a figure leaving through the side gate. She thought it was one of the boys. She recognized the jacket. Brian's jaw twitched. David's tongue moved behind his teeth. I set the last page down. "You wanted leverage," I said. "First with your mother, then with me. You hoped grief would make me quiet. You were wrong." My voice did not rise. It did not need to. It was a stone dropped in a still pond. The ripples went everywhere. The room shifted from defense to rage. David pointed at Richard. "You fed him this. You turned him against us." Richard did not blink. "Your father hired me 30 years ago. He pays my fees with his own checks. He reads everything he signs. He is not confused. He is not weak." Brian turned on his wife. "You told me the policy changes were safe." She pulled her hand away. "You told me your dad never reads fine print," she whispered. "You said he signs whatever you put in front of him." Shame moved across her face like a cloud. I stood. My knees ached, but I held. I looked at the faces around the table and spoke the small truths first. "I paid $60,000 for David's degree," I said. "I bought Brian a truck for $25,000 when his old one died and his job needed wheels. I put $30,000 into a wedding that ran late and a bar bill that ran long. When the roof leaked, I kept buckets in the hallway instead of taking a trip with your mother. When she wanted to see Florence, I said we would go next year. We did not go." I let the silence sit with that. Then I lifted the largest truth. "You did not just betray my money. You betrayed our home. You betrayed your mother's trust. You betrayed your own names." Richard opened a new folder and set down a single crisp document. The heading was clear in bold letters, "Last Will of Harold Stone." He placed a second document beside it, a trust agreement with a clean seal. He looked at me. "Do you want to read the clause?" I shook my head. "No," I said. "I will say it in plain words." I faced my sons. "As of this morning, you are removed as beneficiaries. The house will not be sold for your debts. The savings will not be used for your bets. Everything goes into a community trust. The church will maintain the garden. The scholarship fund will send kids to school in your mother's name. The senior center will receive the rest for meals and home repairs." Brian made a sound I have never heard from a grown man. Half cry, half roar. "You cannot do this," he said, grabbing for the will. Richard slid it back. "It is executed. It is witnessed. It is notarized." David's mouth worked like he was chewing sand. "We will challenge it," he said. "We will say you are not competent." Mrs. Thompson stood. Her cardigan slipped off one shoulder. She fixed it with fingers that have buttoned children's coats in winter and held grandbabies in spring. "I will testify that he is as sharp as a pin," she said. Mr. Harris lifted his cane. "I will tell the judge how he reads every Sunday and corrects the pastor when the verse is off," he said. Richard smiled in the corner of his mouth. "And the bank manager will testify about the phone call, and the notary about the signature, and the doctor about the checkup last week. We are not afraid of your challenge." David's shoulders dropped. The anger drained into fear. He looked at Brian. "You said the debt people would give us time," he said. Brian shook his head like a man trying to clear water from his ears. "You said the appraisal would be fast," he answered. The wives started whispering again, but now the whispers bit. "You promised me a down payment," one said. "You said your dad would not fight." The words bounced like stones. David closed his eyes. "We were supposed to do this quietly," he muttered. Brian backed away from the table and put both hands on his head. "I never wanted the hospital papers," he said too loudly. "That was your idea. You said a doctor would sign. You said it would be easy." The sentence hung in the air like smoke from a match. Richard did not move, but his voice took on steel. "You just admitted consideration of fraud in front of 3 witnesses," he said. David opened his eyes. He looked at me. The boy I taught to tie a shoe flickered in his face for a second and was gone. "Dad," he said, voice small, "where am I supposed to go now?" I wanted to say home. I wanted to say back to when we were decent. I said nothing. Some silences are mercy, some silences are judgment. This one was both. I gathered the documents into a neat stack. I straightened them twice. It calmed me. Richard slipped them into his case. He stood. He did not rush. He shook Mr. Harris's hand and thanked Mrs. Thompson for coming. He told the wives they were free to take copies of the will if they wished. They did not. David leaned into the back of a chair and stared at the wall. Brian paced a short path and then a shorter one. They traded blame under their breath. They tried new sentences. They fell apart on old ones. Neither of them looked at Margaret's picture. I did. I walked to the mantel and touched the silver frame. "We did it," I said in a voice only she would hear. "They thought I was weak. They thought you were gone. They forgot what you left me. They forgot who we are." I stood there for a long time. A clock ticked in the corner, soft, steady, sure. I turned back to the table. I felt taller than I had in months, maybe years. My knees still ached. My breath still caught sometimes on the edges of her name, but my spine was straight. I faced the room. "This house stands," I said. "This garden grows. This table feeds. That is my decision." I watched my words land. Calm. True. Final. David pushed away, grabbed his binder, and nearly dropped it. Brian gathered his pages like a child scooping marbles he had already lost. Their wives went out first. The brothers followed, one step, then another, like men walking through deep snow. The door closed. The house exhaled. So did I. Richard sat again. He took out one last letter and slid it to me. "For the record," he said, "a simple statement of reasons in your voice for why the change was necessary, in case anyone asks." I read it silently. It said what I had said at the table, but cleaner. It named the numbers: 600,000 for the house, 400,000 in savings. It named the debts: 95,000 owed, 50,000 defaulted. It is named the plan: church, scholarships, meals, repairs. It ended with one line. I underlined it. "I am not punishing my sons. I am protecting my wife's name and my own dignity." I signed. My hand did not shake. Mrs. Thompson hugged me at the door. She smelled like lavender and laundry soap. Mr. Harris touched my forearm with 2 fingers and nodded once. Richard carried his case to the car and promised to call in the morning. The sun had lowered outside. The porch boards were warm under my feet. I could hear a lawnmower on the next street. The world had not ended. It had just returned to order. I went back inside and picked up the recorder. I put it away. I closed the diary and slid it into the drawer where Margaret kept the good napkins. I filled the kettle. I leaned on the counter and watched the burner. The blue flames came up smooth. I smiled. The gas line was fine. It had always been fine. It was the lines in my life that needed closing, and today they closed. If you are listening, and you have felt the way I felt in that room, the way the air goes thin when your own child speaks to you, like you are a problem to solve, I want you to hear this next part. That feeling is heavy. That feeling is lonely. That feeling is hard, isn't it? If you believe every parent deserves to be recognized, to be seen, to be honored for what they have given, then type one word in the comments. Honor. Say it out loud if you need to. Honor. Now watch what comes next when the dust settles and the light comes back through the window. I took my mug to the porch. The sky had turned the color of a ripe peach over the oak tree. I listened for the sound of their cars fading and for the sound of my own breath. Somewhere, a dog barked twice and then gave up. I thought about tomorrow. Richard would file the trust documents. The bank would confirm the freeze again. The church board would meet about the garden schedule. The senior center would call about ramps and railings. The scholarship committee would print Margaret's name at the top of a page and write the word fund beside it. I pictured those letters. I pictured a student at a kitchen table writing an essay under a lamp. I pictured a caretaker delivering a meal to a porch and saying a name that once lived in my house. The thought filled my throat. I let it. I closed my eyes. I could see her as if she had just walked inside with her grocery list. She had a way of pinching the list between 2 fingers and tapping it against her palm while she talked. I spoke as if she were standing there. "We are all right," I said. "It hurts. It will hurt for a while, but we are all right." A breeze moved through the leaves and made a soft sound like paper folding. I pretended it was her answer. Inside, the clock in the hall ticked to the top of the hour. The sound used to comfort me. Then it accused me. Today, it simply marked time, not a countdown to loss, a measure of a life that continues. I set my mug down and ran my hand across the back of the chair nearest the head of the table, the chair where Margaret sat when she wrote that letter with the word someday. I pressed my palm there as if I could warm the wood. Then I let go. The house would be quieter after tonight, but it would not be empty. The garden would need weeding. The porch would need paint before the first frost. The railing at the back steps would need tightening. Work is a good thing. Work is a way to tell the world you are still here. My boys would face their own work now, calls they did not want to make, debts they did not want to name. I did not wish them harm. I wished them truth. Truth at last is the only nurse that heals what pride infects. I turned off the lights one by one as the evening deepened. In the living room, I paused and looked at the mantel again. I straightened the frame without thinking. It was an old habit. I smiled at myself. Some habits are worth keeping. Some habits keep you. In the hallway, I touched the pictures of the boys when they were small. I did not take them down. The past deserves its place. It just does not get to run the house. Before bed, I wrote 2 lines in a notebook I keep by the lamp. I wrote the day and the weather and 2 simple sentences. I said what needed saying. I kept what needed keeping. Then I set the pen down and let the quiet fold around me like a blanket that has known my shoulders for years. Tomorrow I will wake, and the sun will find the window like it always does. I will sit on the porch with coffee and let the birds do their small work in the hedge. I will return the call from the church treasurer. I will watch a neighbor wave from the sidewalk. I will breathe. And somewhere, not far from here, 2 men will understand at last that love is not a checking account and a father is not a door you kick until the lock breaks. A father is a house you enter with clean hands or not at all. If you're still watching and find this story interesting, please comment 3 below to let me know you're here with me. The morning after the storm of Chapter 4 felt different. The house, my house, no longer carried the suffocating weight of betrayal. I walked through each room with slow steps, not because of my age, but because I wanted to take it in. This house had been the battlefield, and I had won, not with shouting or fists, but with truth, paper, and courage. The documents were signed, the trust secured, and the deed finalized. The law was on my side, and the plans of David and Brian were in ashes. It did not happen overnight. The lawyers finished filing the protective trust, and within a week, the house and the savings were beyond the reach of my sons. The $600,000 value of the property was locked under my name, and the $400,000 savings account sat frozen until the trustees of the community fund could activate their programs. When the papers came back with the official county seal, I pressed my thumb over the raised stamp. It was more than paper. It was my life. News travels fast in a town like ours. Soon everyone knew that my boys had not just argued with me about money. They had plotted. People who once nodded politely in church began to whisper when David and Brian walked past. Old friends stopped inviting them to poker nights. Neighbors crossed the street to avoid their eyes. The shame was theirs now, not mine. And still the boys tried to reach me. The first letter came 2 weeks after the hearing. David wrote it. The handwriting was jagged, rushed, as if shame itself pressed the pen. He wrote of misunderstanding, of pressure from debts, of love that got lost under stress. He signed it with the word son, as if writing the word could make it true again. I set the letter down on the table, read it twice, and then slid it into a drawer. I don't need their apology, I whispered to the empty kitchen. I need my peace. Brian's attempt was less poetic. A text message that read, "Sorry, Dad. Can we talk? I stared at the little screen until it dimmed. Then I turned the phone off. Forgiveness would not come through those words. Forgiveness came when I chose not to let their betrayal live in me anymore. I did not answer. I did not need to. My peace began in the garden. Margaret's roses had suffered neglect, while my life was tangled with lawyers and lies. I put on gloves, kneeled on the soil, and began to prune. The thorns pricked me once, twice, until I remembered the rhythm. Trim, breathe, step back. Trim, breathe, step back. Soon the buds rose strong again. The sun poured on my shoulders. The smell of earth and bloom reminded me that life can grow again, even after the weeds of betrayal try to choke it. I discovered something else. Neighbors noticed. Mrs. Thompson came over with iced tea and said, "Your roses look like Margaret's touch is still here." I smiled. "She taught me well," I said. The next week, kids from down the street brought me a bag of tomatoes from their little patch. Small acts, small voices, all louder than the silence of my sons. Richard, my lawyer and now my friend, suggested I channel part of the money toward a cause. "Harold," he said, "you've secured your peace. Now let your wife's name live for others too." That thought sat in me like a seed. Within a month, I worked with the church board to establish the Margaret Stone Fund. The savings, $400,000, became scholarships for young people from families who had known betrayal or hardship. The fund also set aside grants for widows struggling to keep their homes. When the first check was handed to a young girl who wanted to study nursing, my chest tightened. I could hear Margaret's voice. "Help them, Harold. That's what life is for." The local paper ran a story. Retired father turns family battle into community gift. My photo ran with Margaret's name in bold. For the first time in years, I did not feel reduced to Old Harold. I was again Harold, husband of Margaret, father, neighbor, giver. People shook my hand at the store. A stranger in line at the pharmacy clapped my back and said, "You did right." Meanwhile, David and Brian spiraled. David lost his car when the lender repossessed it. Brian's debts drew collectors to his door. Their wives, once proud, were seen alone at the market with smaller baskets. Rumor said Brian moved into a rental apartment far from town. Rumor said David borrowed from the wrong men. I did not gloat. I prayed for them in my quiet hours, but I also kept my boundary. Their downfall was not my victory. It was their own choice. One evening I sat in the living room, the diary of Margaret in my lap. The lamplight fell on her words. "We must protect our dignity, Harold, even from those we love." I whispered, "I kept your words. I kept your name." Outside, the cicadas hummed. For the first time in months, the sound was not a reminder of emptiness. It was music. Slowly, my life filled with new rhythms. Morning coffee on the porch, reading novels I had put aside for decades, attending community meetings. Even laughter returned. Mr. Harris told jokes at the senior center, and I laughed until my eyes watered. The ache of betrayal had not vanished, but it no longer defined me. I had stepped out of its shadow. The boys tried once more. A voicemail from Brian, his voice hoarse, saying he wanted to visit. "Just 10 minutes, Dad, please." I deleted it. The past had had its court. The verdict was final. I did not need to reopen the trial. My peace was worth more than 10 minutes of guilt. The true inheritance of life is not money. It is respect. For parents listening now, love your children, yes, but love yourself enough to set boundaries. Love without boundaries is not love. It is surrender. For children, honor is heavier than gold. Betray it, and you lose both the gold and the name. For anyone living in this modern world, remember that character is the only fortune you carry when everything else burns away. I found joy in giving. I volunteered at the senior center on Thursdays, helping with small repairs. A broken lamp, a squeaky chair, nothing grand, but every fix brought a thank you that filled me more than any check I had ever signed. At Christmas, the fund provided coats for children. I saw them running across the churchyard, bright colors flashing, and I knew Margaret's name was stitched into every step. One afternoon in the park, a child I had never met ran up with a dandelion clutched in her small fist. She handed it to me without a word and ran back to her mother. I looked at that little yellow flower. Simple, ordinary, and yet it felt like the whole world telling me, kindness still exists. The world is wider than betrayal. When I walked home that day, I passed the old mailbox. Inside was another letter, this time from David. He wrote that he was moving out of state, that he might never see me again. He asked if I could forgive him. I held the letter, then placed it unopened into the fire pit in the backyard. Flames rose, orange and clean. "I forgive you by not letting this burn me anymore," I said softly, "but I will not answer." The smoke lifted into the sky. My heart felt lighter. Now, mornings are my favorite. I stand in the garden, the roses open again, and I watch the sun rise. I whisper to the air, "Margaret, I kept my promise." The air moves gently through the branches, and I imagine her smile. For those listening, betrayal cuts deeper than knives, but dignity heals deeper than time. Do not hand your soul away for the sake of keeping peace with those who disrespect you. Peace comes when you choose truth over silence, boundaries over begging, self-respect over fear. I have learned that wealth can vanish, houses can burn, and families can fracture. But character, that is the treasure no thief can steal. And so, my story closes not with revenge, but with peace. The house stands, but my heart stands taller. My sons walk their path, and I walk mine. My path has roses, books, neighbors, and Margaret's name living in every kindness I give. The lesson is clear. For parents, do not confuse love with weakness. Protect your dignity as fiercely as you protected your children when they were small. For children, do not forget that your parents' sacrifices are the soil under your feet. Dig it away, and you will fall. And for all of us in this restless modern world, the true measure of a person is not in dollars, but in honor. So I ask you now, after hearing my journey, which lesson speaks to you the most? Comment your answer below so we can carry these truths together. The story has come to an end. I hope it has brought you valuable lessons and insights. If you enjoyed this content, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next video. Goodbye, and see you again.